plasma bolt found its target between the eyes. Trade Minister Wansu dropped to the floor of his luxury office without making a sound. His body hit the marble with a dull thud that echoed through the empty room. Kyung-mi lowered her rifle and checked her watch. 11 minutes and 37 seconds from entry to kill. It's not her best time, but acceptable. She moved like a shadow across the room, her violet-scaled skin seeming to absorb. The dim light from the city below, the dead minister had been selling mining rights to slave traders. The Galactic Council had been too slow to act. Someone else had paid Kyung-mi to be faster. She pulled a small device from her belt and scanned the body. Confirmed dead. No unusual readings. The plasma bolt had left no trace that forensics could follow. In 12 hours, the body would be discovered by cleaning staff. By then, she would be 3 star systems away. Kyung-mi packed her rifle into its case with practiced movements. Each piece fit into custom foam slots. The weapon broke down into 17 parts that looked like common electronics when separated. She had carried it through 43 security checkpoints in the past month. No one ever suspected. The office had floor-to-ceiling windows that faced the main trade district of Kepler's Gate. Thousands of beings moved through the streets below. Humans walked beside tall Zephyrians. Short, stocky dwarven miners shared sidewalks with floating ethereals. The orbital city never slept. Kung-mi felt nothing watching them. No curiosity about their lives, no wonder about their hopes or fears. They were simply obstacles to avoid or tools to use. Her Valdoran conditioning had removed such weaknesses long ago. She moved to the window and pressed a small adhesive charge. Against the reinforced glass, the explosion would be silent and leave a hole just large enough for her to pass through. Standard escape protocol. The charge activated with a soft pop. Glass fragments fell into space, glittering like stars as they tumbled toward the planet below. Kyung-mi stepped to the edge and looked down. 40 floors of empty air separated her. From the street, she activated her gravity belt and stepped into nothing. The belt controlled her fall perfectly. She drifted down between buildings like a leaf in a gentle breeze. Her dark clothing made her nearly invisible against the night sky. Security cameras would see nothing but shadows. 3 blocks from the tower, she landed in an alley and deactivated the belt. The device went back into her jacket pocket. In 30 seconds, she had become just another figure walking through the crowd. Kyung-mi made her way through the lower districts toward the transport hub. The streets here were dirtier, filled with beings who could not afford the upper levels. Vendors sold questionable food from mobile carts. Music from a dozen worlds mixed into chaos. She passed a group of young Talaxians arguing over a card game. Their translator devices sparked and failed, leaving them shouting in their native tongue. None of them noticed the assassin walking past. A beggar reached toward her with a thin, 4-fingered hand. "Credits for food, kind stranger." Kyung-mi looked through him as if he did not exist. The beggar's hand dropped. He had learned not to expect kindness in places like this. The transport hub buzzed with activity, even at this late hour. Freight haulers loaded cargo while passenger ships prepared for departure. The air smelled of fuel and unwashed bodies. Kyung-mi approached the departure board. 7 ships would leave within the next 2 hours. She chose a freight hauler bound for the Outer Rim. The captain asked no questions if you paid in untraceable credits. "Passage to Arcturus 7, she told the dwarven captain. He looked her up and down with experienced eyes. 500 credits, no questions, no manifest entry. She handed him the credits without bargaining. The captain's eyes widened slightly at the crisp bills, but he said nothing. Smart captains learned to stay quiet about passengers who paid premium rates for anonymity. "Cargo Bay 3, we leave in an hour." Kyung-mi found a corner in the cargo bay and settled against a shipping container. Around her, other passengers tried to make themselves comfortable. A family of refugees from the border wars huddled together for warmth. 2 smugglers played a quiet game of chance with worn cards. She closed her eyes but did not sleep. Valdorans needed little rest, and assassins needed less. Instead, she reviewed the mission in her mind, checking for any detail she might have missed. Minister Wansu had died exactly as planned. His security team would find no evidence. The authorities would investigate for weeks and discover nothing. Another perfect job completed. The ship's engines rumbled to life.
Through the hole, Kung Mi felt the familiar sensation of artificial gravity shifting as they left the station's docking bay.
Soon they would jump to hyperspace and begin the 3-day journey to Arcturus. VII. She opened her mission file on a secured datapad. Her next target was a human diplomat named Du Hayan. The file contained basic information: age 32, career. Diplomat recently assigned to Arcturus 7 as a cultural liaison. Kyumi studied his photograph. Humans looked strange to her violet eyes. Their skin was too soft, their features too rounded. They had only 2 arms, 2 legs, and ridiculously vulnerable bodies. Yet somehow they had talked their way into the Galactic Council and gained access. To advanced technology, the mission briefing was simple. Du Hayan had been interfering with mining operations in the Outer Rim. He asked too many questions about worker conditions. He filed too many reports about safety violations. He made certain criminals nervous. Someone wanted him dead. Someone was paying Kyung Mi 3 million credits to make it happen quickly and quietly. She memorized every detail in the file. Du Hayan's daily schedule, his favorite restaurants, his security arrangements. The information painted a picture of a careful but not paranoid man. He took reasonable precautions but did not live in fear. That would make him easier to kill. Kung Mi had ended 300 lives in her career. She had killed crime lords and politicians, rebels and loyalists, beings of dozens of different species. Each death had been clean, professional, completely without emotion. Du Hayan would be number 301. The cargo bay grew quiet as the other passengers settled in for the long journey. Outside the ship, stars blurred into lines. As they entered hyperspace, Kyung-mi closed the mission file and put away the datapad. In 3 days, she would begin studying her target. In a week, he would be dead. In 2 weeks, she would be back on Nexus Station, counting her payment and waiting for the next contract. It was a life without complications, without connections, without the weakness of caring about anything beyond the next job. Kung-mi preferred it that way. Emotions were a luxury that assassins could not afford. The freight ship dropped out of hyperspace with a violent shudder that rattled every bolt in the cargo bay. Kyung-mi opened her eyes as artificial gravity fluctuated, making her stomach lurch. Around her, other passengers groaned and cursed in 12 languages. Arcturus 7 dead ahead, the captain announced over crackling speakers. Docking in 2 hours. Hope you enjoyed the scenic route. Through a small porthole, Kyung-mi could see the trade world spinning slowly against the star field. Arcturus 7 looked like a blue-green marble streaked with white clouds. 3 orbital stations hung around it like metal moons, connected to the surface by massive elevator cables. She gathered her few possessions and checked her weapons. The plasma rifle remained broken down in its case, disguised as surveying equipment. Her backup pistol was hidden in a boot holster. Vibraknife rested against her spine, invisible to most scanners. The docking process took longer than expected. Port Authority kept the ship waiting while they ran security checks. Kyung-mi watched through the porthole as patrol craft circled their vessel with scanning beams. Tighter than usual, muttered one of the smugglers. Something got them spooked. The refugee family huddled closer together. The mother held her children protectively while the father spoke quietly into a COM device. Their faces showed the kind of fear that came from running for too long. Finally, the docking clamps engaged with a heavy thud. The cargo bay doors opened to reveal a busy spaceport filled with beings from across the galaxy. The air smelled of ozone and recycled atmosphere. Kyung-mi joined the line of passengers waiting to clear customs. The inspector was a bored-looking Centaurian with 4 arms and too many eyes. He barely glanced at her forged identification before waving her through. Purpose of visit? Trade negotiations? She lied smoothly. Duration of stay? 2 weeks? He stamped her papers without interest. Welcome to Arcturus 7. Stay out of trouble. Spaceport opened into a vast commercial district filled with shops, restaurants, and hotels. Holographic advertisements floated overhead in scripts she could not read. The noise was incredible, thousands of voices speaking hundreds of languages, all competing with mechanical sounds and electronic music. Kung Mi found a currency, exchanged and converted some of her credits to local money. She bought a basic cum unit and a tourist map from a vendor who tried to interest her in guided tours of the planet's famous crystal caves. Her first priority was finding accommodations. She needed somewhere private but not suspicious, with good sightlines and multiple escape routes. After walking through several districts, she settled on a mid-level hotel in the diplomatic quarter. The desk clerk was a young Galaxian with nervous hands and a ready smile. Single room for how long? A week? Possibly 2? Business or pleasure? Business. She paid in cash and declined the offer of room service. Her room was on the 7th floor with a view of the government complex where Duhan worked. Perfect for surveillance. She unpacked her equipment and set up a basic observation post by the window. Through her scope, she could see beings moving through the complex courtyard. Diplomats in formal robes walked beside military officers in crisp uniforms. Security guards stood at regular intervals, alert but not tense. Kyung-Mi activated her cum unit and accessed the local information networks. She needed to learn about human behavior patterns and local security procedures. The files from her employer had been basic enough to identify the target, but not enough to plan a perfect kill. Humans were apparently new to galactic politics. Their homeworld had only made contact with other species 20 years ago. They had no natural advantages. They were not particularly strong, fast, or intelligent compared to other races. Yet somehow, they had earned respect and trust from species that had been spacefaring for millennia. It made no sense to her. She spent the next day studying the diplomatic quarter. Duhan's office was on the 3rd floor of the main building. He arrived each morning at exactly 8:30 local time and left around 6 in the evening. His security detail consisted of 2 guards who seemed more interested in looking professional than actually protecting anyone. On the 2nd day, she followed him home. He lived in a modest apartment building, popular with off-world professionals. No special security measures, no bodyguards. He walked the same route every evening, stopping at the same small market to buy food. Kyung-Mi could have killed him a dozen times already. A sniper shot from her hotel room, poison in his food. Staged accident on his walk home. The target was practically defenseless, but something made her hesitate. On the 3rd day, she watched him through her scope as he sat in an outdoor cafe during his lunch break. Instead of eating alone, like most beings in his position, he was sharing his table with a small Zephyrian child who appeared to be lost. The child was crying. Nice. A high-pitched whistling sound that Zephyrians made when distressed. Duhan could not speak her language, but he was trying to comfort her anyway. He pulled something from his pocket, small wrapped objects that he offered to the child. Candy, Kyung-Mi realized. He was giving candy to a frightened alien child. Zephyrian stopped crying and accepted the sweet. Duhan smiled and pointed to different areas of the district while speaking slowly in broken Zephyrian. He was trying to help her find her parents. For several minutes, Kyung-Mi watched this strange scene through her rifle scope. She had a clear shot. One squeeze of the trigger, and the contract would be complete. But she found herself studying Duhan's face instead. He looked genuinely concerned about the child's welfare. When a group of adult Zephyrians approached, clearly searching for someone, his face lit up with relief. He waved them over and gently encouraged the child to run to her family. The Zephyrians spoke rapidly to Duhan in their own language. He could not understand them, but their gratitude was obvious. The child's mother touched his hand in a gesture of thanks before the family departed. Duhan sat back down and finished his lunch alone. But he kept smiling as he watched the reunited family disappear into the crowd. Kyung-Mi lowered her rifle. Confused, she had studied hundreds of targets over the years. Politicians who smiled for cameras while planning genocide, grime lords who donated to charity while enslaving entire worlds, Greybles who claimed to fight for freedom while murdering. Innocent, they all had angles. Hidden motives. Secret agendas that made sense once you understood what drove them. But Duhan had spent his lunch break helping a lost child for no reason except kindness. No cameras were recording him. No political advantage could be gained. It simply seen someone who needed help and provided it. Such behavior is illogical, inefficient, wasteful of time and resources. Why did it make her feel strange? That evening, Kyung-mi sat in her hotel room cleaning her rifle while reviewing surveillance footage she had recorded. She played the cafe scene 3 times, studying Do-haen's expressions and body language for signs of deception. She found none. His concern for the child appeared genuine. His joy at the reunion seemed real. There was no performance here, no calculation of benefit. For the first time in her professional career, Kyung-mi began to wonder if she understood her target at all. The human was proving more complicated than expected. Kyung-mi spent the next morning following Do-haen at a safe distance. She expected him to go directly to his office like most government workers. Instead, he made 3 stops that made no sense. First, he visited a medical clinic in the lower district. Not for treatment, he waited outside for 20 minutes until an elderly dwarven woman emerged on crutches. Do-haen helped her into a transport and paid the driver. The woman tried to give him credits, but he refused and walked away. Before she could argue. Second, he stopped at a construction site where Zephyrian workers were building new housing. Do-haen spoke with the foreman for several minutes, pointing at safety equipment and taking notes. The foreman looked annoyed. But Do-haen kept asking questions about worker conditions and accident reports. Third, he bought lunch from a street vendor and immediately gave half of it to a group of homeless crystallines who lived under a bridge. He sat with them while they ate, tempting conversation despite the language barrier. None of these actions served any obvious purpose. It did not advance his career or improve his position. They cost him time, money, and energy with no apparent benefit. Kyung-mi had studied behavioral patterns of hundreds of targets. Politicians helped people when cameras were watching. Business leaders donated to charity for tax benefits. Military officers showed kindness to build loyalty among their troops. Every action had a reason. Every kindness had a price. But Do-haen's behavior followed no logical pattern she could identify. That evening, she decided to get closer. She disguised herself as a Valderon trader and set up a small fruit stand near the market where Do-haen bought his groceries. Her enhanced hearing would let her catch every word he spoke. The next day, Do-haen appeared at his usual time. He walked past several vendors before stopping at her stand. Up close, Kyung-mi could see details that her scope had missed. His clothes were well made but not expensive. His shoes showed signs of regular walking. His hands had small scars that suggested he did physical work sometimes. "These look wonderful," he said in accented Galactic standard, examining her selection of imported fruits. "Are they from your homeworld?" Kyung-mi nodded, not trusting her voice. She had prepared for questions about the fruit, but not for casual conversation. "You must miss it," Do-haen continued. "Being so far from home, I mean. I know I do sometimes." He selected several pieces of fruit and paid without haggling over the price. Then he did something that made her enhanced senses spike. With confusion, he paid twice the asking price and told her to keep the extra credits. "For your daughter," he said with a smile. The vendor who usually works this corner mentioned someone was covering for her while she cares for a sick child. "That is very kind of you." Kyung-mi stared at him, her violet eyes wide. She had not spoken to the regular vendor. Do-haen had somehow learned her cover story and was now rewarding what he thought was an act of kindness. "Thank you," she managed to say. Do-haen started to walk away, then turned back.
"Oh,
"And if you are ever free for coffee, there is a great little place on the upper concourse. Best view of the nebula in the system." He pointed toward the commercial district and smiled. Again, before disappearing into the crowd, Kyung-mi stood frozen behind her fruit stand, staring at the extra credits in her hand. Her enhanced senses had detected no deception in his voice, no hidden agenda in his body language, no calculation behind his kindness. He had been genuinely nice to a complete stranger, for no reason except basic decency. It made no sense that afternoon. She abandoned her fruit stand and followed Do-haen to his office building, instead of working. At his desk, spent 2 hours in the cafeteria teaching a group of young alien workers to play human card games. The workers were recent immigrants who spoke little Galactic standard. Do-haen used simple words and hand gestures to explain the rules. When they made mistakes, he laughed and helped them correct their errors. When they won games, he celebrated with them as if their success made him happy. Kyung-mi watched from a corner table, pretending to read reports on her datapad. She could not understand why Du-haen was wasting his time with beings who could offer him nothing in return. The next day brought more confusing behavior. Du-haen spent his lunch break helping an elderly Talaxian navigate government paperwork. The old being was trying to bring his family to Arcturus 7, but the forms were written in languages he could not read. Du-haen sat with him for an hour, carefully explaining each section and helping fill out the complex documents. When they finished, the Talaxian offered him a family heirloom as payment. Du-haen refused the gift and instead bought the old being lunch at a nearby restaurant. Family should be together, Du-haen told him in broken Talaxian. I am happy to help. Watching from across the street, Kyung-mi felt something strange stirring in her chest, a warmth she had never experienced before. Her Valdoran conditioning had taught her that helping others was weakness, that emotional connections led to failure and death, but Du-haen seemed stronger because of his connections, not weaker. That evening, she found herself at the coffee shop he had mentioned. She had not planned to go there. Her feet simply carried her to the upper concourse, while her mind was processing the day's observations. The shop was small and quiet. The large windows that faced the nebula Du-haen had described, the view was indeed spectacular. Ribbons of purple and gold gas stretched across space like cosmic silk. Kyung-mi ordered a simple drink and sat at a table by the window. She tried to focus on her mission, but her thoughts kept returning to Du-haen's behavior. Every interaction she had witnessed challenged her understanding of how intelligent beings operated in her experience. Kindness was always transactional, help was always conditional, love was always temporary, but Du-haen seemed to give freely without expecting anything in return. He helped strangers he would never see again, showed genuine concern for beings who could offer him no advantage. Such behavior should have made him weak and vulnerable. Instead, everywhere he went, people smiled when they saw him. Workers sought his advice. Children ran to greet him. Even hardened merchants offered him better prices than they gave other customers. His kindness created more kindness around him. Like ripples spreading across still water, Kyung-mi sat in the coffee shop until late evening, watching the nebula shift colors as the planet rotated. For the first time in her life, she was not thinking about killing someone. She was thinking about what it might feel like to care about others the way Du-haen did. The thought terrified her more than any weapon ever had. When she finally returned to her hotel room, she found a message waiting on her cum unit. Her employer wanted a progress report. The contract should have been completed days ago. She stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding tomorrow. She would have to make a choice. Complete her mission or continue watching. Man who was teaching her that everything she believed about strength and weakness might be wrong. The next morning brought news of a local festival. Colorful banners appeared overnight throughout the diplomatic quarter announcing the Harvest of Three Moons celebration. Vendors set up stalls selling traditional foods from dozens of worlds. Music drifted through the streets as different species prepared there. Cultural displays. Kyung-mi watched from her hotel window as beings decorated the central plaza. Children of various species ran between the stalls, their parents following with patient smiles. The festival would make surveillance more difficult, but it might also provide better opportunities for an accident. She packed her equipment and went downstairs to blend with the growing crowds. The streets were filled with beings she had never seen together before. Tall ethereals floated beside short dwarven families. Scaled reptilians shared food with furry mammalians. The festival seemed to break down the usual barriers between species. Du-haen appeared near the main stage at exactly 10 in the morning, but instead of observing the festivities like other government officials, he was carrying boxes of supplies and setting up activity stations for children. Kyung-mi found a position behind a food stall where she could watch without being noticed. Through her scope, she saw Du-haen unpacking art materials, simple games, and toys that looked handmade. He worked quickly but carefully, testing each activity to make sure it was safe. Within an hour, dozens of children had gathered around his stations. They came from every species represented at the festival. Some walking, some floating, some crawling on multiple legs. Duhaon greeted each one with the same warm smile, speaking to them in whatever language he could manage. A group of young Zephyrians clustered around a painting station. Duhaon showed them how to mix colors on paper, his hands moving slowly, so they could follow his example. When they created something beautiful, he clapped and praised them in broken Zephyrian that made them whistle with joy. At another station, crystalline children were learning to build structures from colored blocks. Their natural ability to see geometric patterns made them excellent builders. Duhaon encouraged them to create increasingly complex designs. He seemed genuinely amazed by their talent. But it was the music station that caught Kyunmi's attention most. Duhaon had set up simple instruments from his homeworld, wooden flutes, small drums, and string devices called guitars. He was teaching alien children to play human songs. The music was unlike anything she had heard before, not the complex harmonies of Valderon war chants or the mathematical precision of crystalline tone poems. These songs were simple melodies that seemed designed to make people feel happy. A small dwarven girl with braided hair was struggling to hold the guitar properly. Her arms were too short for the instrument, and she kept dropping the pick. Other children might have given up, but Duhaon knelt beside her and showed her a different way to play. He helped her rest the guitar on her lap and use her fingers instead of the pick. The sound was softer, but just as beautiful. When she managed to play a complete melody, her face lit up with pride. Duhaon cheered as if she had just performed for the Galactic Council. Music is for everyone, he told her in simple Galactic. Standard. Big instruments, small instruments, different ways to play. All good. Kyungmi found herself leaning forward, straining to hear every word. Something about his voice when he spoke to children was different from his diplomatic tone. It was warmer, more genuine, filled with an emotion she could not name. As the day progressed, more children joined the activities. Parents began gathering around the stations, drawn by their children's laughter. Soon adults were participating. 2. Learning human games and teaching Duhaon activities from their own cultures. A group of Talaxian elders showed him a traditional weaving technique. Reptilian merchants taught him counting games used to train young traders. Even some ethereals descended from their usual floating height to demonstrate their species. Meditation exercises. Duhaon tried everything with enthusiasm. He was terrible at Talaxian weaving and could barely count in Reptilian, but his willingness to learn seemed to delight everyone around him. His mistakes became sources of laughter rather than embarrassment. He makes failure fun, an elderly Zephyrian commented to her companion. Very strange human behavior, but effective. As evening approached, the festival activities began winding down. Children were tired but happy, many carrying small crafts or toys they had made. Parents thanked Duhaon repeatedly, some offering gifts that he politely declined, but one incident made Kyungmi's enhanced senses spike with alarm. A small crystalline child, no bigger than a human infant, but infinitely more fragile, had wandered away from its family cluster. Crystalline children could easily die if separated from their hive-mind connection for too long. The child was already beginning to flicker, its translucent body losing cohesion. Duhaon noticed immediately. He dropped the supplies he was packing and knelt beside the frightened child. He could not touch it directly, human skin would disrupt its crystalline structure, but he began speaking in soft, reassuring tones. Hey there, little one. Are you lost? Let me help you find your family. The child's flickering slowed slightly at the sound of his voice. Duhaon continued talking while, scanning the crowd for adult crystallines, he found none nearby. Without hesitation, he began moving through the festival, asking every being he met if they had seen a crystalline family. Most beings would have given up after a few minutes, but Duhaon searched for over an hour. Chung Dashmi followed at a distance, fascinated despite herself. She watched him crawl through maintenance tunnels because someone thought they had seen crystallines near the power systems. She saw him climb scaffolding to reach upper levels where crystallines sometimes rested. He ignored his scraped hands and torn clothes, focused entirely on saving the child. Finally, he found the family cluster in a quiet corner of the plaza. They had been searching frantically, their harmonic voices creating a sound of pure anguish. When Duhaon appeared with their child, The relief was immediate and overwhelming. The cluster elder, a being older than most civilizations, approached Du-Hyen with slow, measured movements. Its voice resonated like crystal chimes in wind. "Why do this for strangers, young human? This child is not your species, not your responsibility, not your concern. Why risk yourself for one who can offer nothing in return?" Du-Hyen looked puzzled by the question. He glanced at the child, now safely rejoined with its family and glowing with renewed health. "Because they needed help," he said simply. "Isn't that enough?" The cluster elder studied him for a long moment. Its ancient eyes held wisdom from countless worlds and eons of experience. When it finally spoke, its voice carried a note of wonder. "Your species is very strange, human Du-Hyen. We will remember this kindness for 1,000 years." That night, Kyunmi sat in the coffee shop again, staring at the nebula without really seeing it. Her hand shook slightly as she held her cup, a tremor that had nothing to do with physical weakness. She had watched Du-Hyen spend an entire day creating joy for others. No payment, no recognition, no advantage gained. He had simply seen beings who could be happier and worked to make it happen. When the crystalline child was in danger, he had searched until he found help, not because anyone forced him, not because duty required it, but because a small being needed saving. For the first time in her life, Kyungmi began to understand what her Valderon trainers had tried to eliminate. She was feeling something beyond professional interest. Something warm and painful and completely terrifying she was beginning to care about. Du-Hyen's well-being more than her own mission success. The realization hit her like a physical blow, making her gasp and spill coffee across the table. The message came at dawn on the 10th day. Kyungmi's cum unit buzzed with an encrypted transmission that made her blood freeze. Crime Lord Jeho's voice was cold and dangerous. "The target still breathes. This is unacceptable. You have 48 hours to complete the contract or join him in death. And my enforcers are already en route to Arcturus 7. Do not disappoint me again." Kyumi stared at the device, her violet hands trembling. In 20 years as an assassin, she had never failed. To complete a mission, she had never even been late. Her reputation was built on absolute reliability. Now, she had 10 days of surveillance. Footage showing dozens of opportunities to kill Du-Hyen. Any one of them would have been clean and untraceable. But each time she had hesitated, found excuses. Delayed the inevitable. She walked to her window and looked down at the diplomatic quarter. Du-Hyen would leave his apartment building in 2 hours for his morning walk. The route passed through a quiet park with perfect sightlines from her hotel room. One shot would end everything. Kyung-Mi assembled her plasma rifle with mechanical precision. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar routine, but her mind felt disconnected from her actions. The weapon that had killed 300 beings seemed heavier than usual. She sat up at the window and adjusted the scope. The crosshairs found their mark on the park bench where Du-Hyen sat every morning to feed local birds. The range was perfect. Wind conditions were ideal. Security presence was minimal. All she had to do was wait. At exactly 8:15, Du-Hyen appeared on the pathway, carried a small bag of breadcrumbs, and wore the same patient smile she had observed for days. Colorful alien birds began gathering as soon as they saw him. Knowing food would come, Kyung-Mi tracked him through the scope as he sat on the bench. Her finger rested on the trigger. Shot was lined up perfectly. One squeeze and the contract would be complete. Jeho would pay her 3 million credits. She could return to her old life of clean kills and cold professionalism. But as she watched, Du-Hyen reached into his jacket and pulled out something unexpected. Not just breadcrumbs for the birds, but a small wrapped package and a handmade card. Through her scope, Kyung-Mi followed his path as he walked past the bench to a darker corner of the park. There, sitting against a maintenance building, was an elderly Vorthan beggar. His clothes were patched and worn, his face marked by years of hardship. Most beings walked past him without acknowledgement. Du-Hyen sat down beside the old Vorthan as if joining a friend. He unpacked food from his bag, not the simple meal she had expected, but a carefully prepared feast. Fresh fruit, protein bars, even a small container of what looked like soup. "Good morning, Minho," Du-Hyen said in broken Vorthan. I brought breakfast. The beggar's face lit up with genuine joy. Kind Duhayan. You should not spend credits on old fool like me. Friends take care of friends, Duhayan replied, his pronunciation clumsy but sincere. They shared the meal in comfortable silence. Kyung-mi watched through her scope, finger still on the trigger, as two beings from different worlds and circumstances simply enjoyed each other's company. Then the Vorthon reached into his ragged coat and pulled out a small, tattered photograph. Even through the scope, Kyung-mi could see. It showed a family, a younger Vorthon with his mate and 3 children, all smiling at the camera. My family, Minho said quietly. Lost in the mining accident on Kepler Station 15 years ago. I show you before, yes. Yes. Duhayan nodded. Tell me about them again. I like hearing their stories. The old Vorthon's voice became stronger as he described his children's personalities, his mate's laugh, the little house they had shared before tragedy struck. Duhayan listened with complete attention, asking gentle questions that encouraged the old being to remember happier times. Kyung-dashmi realized this was not their first such conversation. Duhayan had been visiting this beggar regularly, bringing food and companionship to someone the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. He knew the names of Minho's dead family members. He remembered their stories. He cared about keeping their memory alive. Sometimes I dream they come back, Minho whispered. Foolish old thoughts? Not foolish, Duhayan said firmly. Love does not die with the body. They live on in your heart, in your memories, in the stories you tell. That makes them real. Vorthon's eyes filled with tears. You understand better than most beings twice your age, young human. Pain is universal, Duhayan replied. But so is love. We share both across all species. As Kyung-mi watched this exchange, something inside her chest began to crack. Not physically, but emotionally, like ice breaking under pressure from within. The conditioning that had shaped her since childhood started to fracture along lines she had never noticed before. Her Valderon trainers had taught her that emotions were weakness, that caring for others led to failure and death, that survival required complete isolation of the heart. For 20 years, she'd believed these lessons without question, but Duhayan was living proof that they were wrong. He cared deeply about others, and was stronger because of it. His kindness created loyalty and respect wherever he went. His willingness to help strangers had built a network of allies across multiple species. His emotional connections made him more effective, not less. Everything she had been taught was backwards. The rifle began to shake in her hands. Not from physical weakness, but from the emotional earthquake happening inside her mind. Tears she had never cried before started flowing down her violet cheeks, leaving dark stains on her clothing. Through the scope, she watched Duhayan gently embrace the old Vorthon before preparing to leave. He pressed the wrapped package into Minho's hands despite the beggar's protests. For later, Duhayan insisted. When you get hungry tonight, he stood and walked back toward the main path, completely unaware that an assassin's rifle was trained on his heart. Minho watched him go with the expression of someone who had been shown unexpected. Kindness in a cruel universe. Kyung-mi's finger remained on the trigger. The shot was still clean. Duhayan was still an easy target. Nothing had changed except everything she thought about the crystalline child he had saved, the alien workers he taught card games, the lost Zephyrian girl he had comforted with candy and smiles, the festival children he had entertained for hours without payment, she thought. About his genuine confusion when asked why he helped strangers, his simple answer, that needing help, was reason enough to provide it. For the first time in her life, Kyung-mi understood what her species had lost when they eliminated emotional connections. They had gained perfect killers, but lost perfect souls. They could destroy anything, but could create nothing beautiful. Duhayan created beauty everywhere he went. Joy, hope, kindness, love, emotions her people had discarded as weakness, were actually the greatest. Strengths in the universe. The rifle slipped from her hands and clattered to the floor. Kyung-mi collapsed beside it, sobbing with 20 years of suppressed emotions finally breaking free. The ice around her heart melted completely. Leaving her vulnerable and terrified and more alive than she had ever been, she was no longer the galaxy's premier. Hitwoman. She was a being who had learned to feel love, and it was the most powerful weapon she had ever encountered. Kyung-mi spent 3 hours on the floor of her hotel room, crying tears she had never known she could shed. When the emotional storm finally passed, she felt empty but strangely clean, like a wound that had been properly treated after years of infection. She picked up her rifle and carefully disassembled it. Each piece went back into its foam slot, but this time she knew she would never use it to kill again. The weapon that had defined her life for 20 years had become nothing more than expensive. Metal and plastic, her cum unit buzzed with another message. This time it was not from Jeho, but from his enforcer captain, a brutal Saurian named Akasu, who specialized in hunting down failed assassins. Target confirmed alive. Employer extremely displeased. Arriving Arcturus 7 in 18 hours. Recommend you complete mission immediately or flee system. Personal advice: flee. Employer wants you both dead now. Kyung-mi stared at the message. In 18 hours, professional killers would arrive to eliminate both her and Do-haen. She could run, her ship was fueled and ready. But that would leave Do-haen defenseless against beings who killed for sport rather than business. She made her choice. 20 minutes later, she stood outside Do-haen's apartment building. Her hand shook as she pressed the call button for his unit. She had rehearsed what to say dozens of times, but the words still felt impossible. Hello? Do-haen's voice came through the speaker. My name is Kyung-mi. I need to speak with you urgently. It is about your safety. A long pause. Are you the fruit vendor from the market? Yes, please. This is very important. Come up. 3rd floor, apartment 12. The door buzzed open. Kyung-mi climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling like she was walking toward her own execution. Everything she had been trained to do said this was wrong. Assassins did not reveal themselves to targets. They did not form emotional connections. They certainly did not risk their lives to save someone. They were supposed to kill. Do-haen opened his apartment door with the same warm smile she had observed for weeks. He looked concerned but not afraid, even though a stranger was requesting an urgent meeting about his safety. Please, come in, he said. Can I offer you something to drink? His apartment was small but comfortable. Books filled handmade shelves. Along the walls, photographs of friends from dozens of different species covered his desk. Art projects that looked like gifts from the children at the festival hung carefully on display. It was the home of someone who treasured connections with. Others. Kyung-mi sat on his offered chair and tried to find the right words. How did you tell someone you had been hired to kill them? How did you explain that you had changed your mind because of their kindness? You are in danger, she began slowly. Very serious danger. Do-haen sat across from her, his expression becoming more serious. What kind of danger? Someone has hired assassins to kill you. Because of your work with mining operations in the Outer Rim? Because you asked too many questions about worker safety and illegal activities? I see. Do-haen was quiet for a moment. How do you know this? Kyung-mi took a deep breath. Because I am one of the assassins. She expected him to run, to call for security, to show fear or anger. Instead, Do-haen leaned back in his chair and studied her face with curious eyes. But you are warning me instead of killing me, he said. Why? Because I've been watching you for 2 weeks, Kyung-mi replied. I have seen how you treat others. I have seen your kindness to strangers, your care for children, your friendship with beings that others ignore. You helped a lost child with candy. You saved a crystalline from separation death. You bring food to an old beggar and listen to stories about his dead family. Tears started flowing again as she spoke. My people taught me that caring for others was weakness, that emotions led to failure. But you are the strongest person I have ever met, and it is because you care so much. Do-haen was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle. What is your real name? Kyung-mi. I'm Valdoran. We are trained from childhood to be perfect killers. No emotions, no connections, no mercy. I have killed 300 beings in 20 years, but not me, not you. I cannot harm someone who has shown me what it means to be truly alive. Do-haen stood and walked to his window. Outside, the diplomatic quarter was busy with afternoon traffic. Beings of dozens of species went about their daily lives, most of them unaware that acts of kindness were happening around them constantly. "Much danger am I in?" he asked. "Extreme danger?" "My employer is sending a team of professional killers. They will arrive in 17 hours. These are not beings who will listen to reason or show mercy. And you, what happens to you?" "They will kill me too for failing to complete my contract. But that does not matter anymore." Duhain turned back to face her. "It matters to me." For a moment they looked at each other across the small apartment, human diplomat and a Valdoran assassin, two beings who should never have connected but had found something valuable in their unlikely meeting. "I have an idea," Duhain said finally. "But I will need your help." "Anything." "You know how these killers think? How they operate? Help me stop them, and then help me expose the entire criminal network that hired you. The Galactic Council needs to know about illegal mining operations and the violence used to protect them." Kyungmi felt something she had never experienced before: hope. "You would trust me to help you. After what I am, you're not what you were trained to be," Duhain said with absolute certainty. "You are who you choose to become. I think you have already chosen." The next 16 hours passed in careful planning. Young Mi shared everything she knew about Jeho's operations, his enforcement methods, and the killers who were coming. Duhain used his diplomatic connections to alert Galactic Council security and prepare evidence packets for immediate transmission. When Doksu and his team arrived, they found not a helpless diplomat and a failed assassin, but a coordinated response from multiple agencies: Council security, local law enforcement, and military units surrounded them before they could leave their ship. Kyungmi's testimony provided crucial evidence that led to arrests across 17 star systems. Jeho's entire network collapsed. Within a month, hundreds of enslaved workers were freed from illegal mining operations. 6 months later, Kyungmi sat in their favorite coffee shop, watching the nebula shift colors in the evening light. She had traded her rifle for a datapad and now worked as a cultural advisor, helping different species understand and trust each other. Duhain sat across from her, sharing the chocolate candies that had become a symbol of their friendship. He still carried them everywhere, ready to offer comfort to anyone who needed it. "I never thanked you properly," Kyungmi said, taking his hand, "for saving my life." "I did not save your life," Duhain replied with that smile that had started. "Everything I just offered you, Candy." "Same thing," Kyungmi said, and laughed with pure joy. Other Valdorans had begun visiting Arcturus 7, curious about the assassin who had learned to feel emotions. Some stayed to learn what she had discovered. Others returned home to share stories of a different way to live. Change came slowly to her people. But it came. The galaxy's premier Hitwoman had found something better than perfection in killing. She had found perfection in living, loving, and welving, and helping others discover the same transformation. And it all began with a human who believed that kindness was reason enough to care.